5 hours before anyone in Moscow had a clue, 14 drones lifted off from the fields of Ukraine. Each carried the explosive power of 40 kilograms of TNT. Those steady and deliberate tools rose almost silently into the dark, one after another, only to reach a single ship hundreds of kilometers away and make sure it never moved again. Far to the east, in the Caspian Sea, that ship waited at anchor. On its deck sat nearly 5,000 tons of cargo from Iran, components for the very drones Russia used to attack Ukrainian cities. The crew believed they were beyond reach. The Caspian felt safe, too far for anyone to touch. But as the night deepened, those drones kept flying. They crossed rivers, lowlands, and radar shadows, and closed in on a target that didn't even know it was being hunted. What happened next would not only sink a ship, but also change the way Russia looked at its own backyard. 5,000 tons of military cargo sat inside the Russian freighter Port Olia 4. It was anchored in the Caspian Sea, far from Ukraine, under a Russian flag. For the crew, it was another routine stop, but for Ukrainian intelligence, it was a high-value target. The ship's manifest listed industrial parts, but satellite images told a different story. Crates filled with Iranian drone components, avionics modules, power units, and rocket ammunition were visible on deck. Enough material to build hundreds of Shahed drones, the same type used to strike Ukrainian cities night after night. For days, Allied and Ukrainian satellites stayed locked onto the vessel. Every movement, every shift of anchor, and every small attempt to disguise its location was tracked in real time. The captain didn't know it, but his ship was under constant watch from orbit. He believed the Caspian was beyond reach, hundreds of kilometers from the war. However, when the launch command came from Kiev, it moved through satellites already aligned with his coordinates. The drones answered. The captain had chosen a narrow inland channel for anchorage, believing it safer than the open port. That decision made the ship look less exposed, but it did not hide it. Japanese commercial satellites equipped with synthetic aperture radar tracked the vessel through clouds and darkness. SAR picked up hull shape, anchor chain angle, and movement even when transponders were off. Analysts stacked successive satellite passes and measured the drift. From those images, they calculated an anchorage window of roughly 4 to 6 hours, which was a fantastic opportunity for an operation. Signals intelligence added confirmation. Intermittent radar and radio patterns showed the ship in low-profile mode. Silence cut both ways. It reduced obvious signatures, but also confirmed deliberate concealment. With imagery and signals aligned, planners saw a single opening, a short, well-defined period when the ship would be vulnerable. The objective was specific and limited. They never wanted to detonate the volatile cargo. All they wanted was to sink the ship in a controlled way and put thousands of drone parts underwater. That constraint framed the tactics. The attack had to breach decks and open water lines without triggering catastrophic explosions. In simpler words, it had to be surgical, timed, and most importantly, layered across multiple approach vectors. Ukraine used long-range kamikaze UAVs based on the UJ-26ER platform. The airframes were composite to reduce radar returns. They cruised at 150 to 180 kilometers per hour, which was fast enough for range and slow enough to hug radar clutter. Navigation combined GNSS with inertial guidance and a final electro-optical check at the end. If GPS was denied, the drones could still complete their programmed approach. Warheads weighed about 40 kilograms. Some were fragmentation types, others semi-penetrating. The mix was chosen to tear open thin deck plates, disable ventilation shafts, fracture internal beams, and breach waterline strips. Each UJ-26ER could reach roughly 1,200 kilometers with extra fuel. 14 drones were assigned, 12 were attackers, while 2 were relays. Synchronization finished around 5:25 in the morning. The plan split the attack into 4 axes. One group targeted the stern starboard section, aiming for engines and the stern deck. Another approached the bowport side to strike the bridge and forward compartments. A third hit the midsection to crack beams and open cargo hatches. The final pair acted as diversions, ready to deter tugboats or patrol craft. Launch unfolded across Ukrainian fields at 5:45. The flight was choreographed to fly low over land and sea, between 20 and 60 meters above the surface. Two relay drones climbed higher, between 300 and 500 meters, to pass signals and preserve visual control. To coastal radars, they appeared as low-priority echoes, small composite signatures that blended into routine sea clutter. At 10:28 local time, the first drone hit. The warhead struck the aft upper deck and tore open plates around the engine ventilation shaft. Cables burned, control circuits failed, and fires spread through wiring trays. Minutes later, a second drone slammed into the starboard waterline. Water began pushing into the lower compartments. Pumps kicked in, but could not keep up. The third and fourth impacts came almost instantly. One struck a hatch cover, and another hit the port waterline strip. Consequently, structural connections failed. Smoke and burning debris moved across the deck. The ship began to list to starboard. Alarms sounded, and port security launched tugboats and a patrol craft. At 10:31, a drone hit near the bow and control room, which left the electrical panels shorted. The bridge went dark, and systems switched to battery backup. Between 10:33 and 10:36, two more drones hit the starboard hull and ripped a large tear. Gradually, flooding accelerated, and by 10:38, the crew abandoned ship. Lifeboats entered the water as smoke rose from the stern. Defenders shot down two Ukrainian drones, but the damage was already severe. At 10:41, the 8th drone struck the lower midship belt, and the list increased to about 7 degrees. Flooding pumps were overwhelmed. The 9th and 10th drones hit the stern shaft tunnel, rupturing propulsion lines and releasing fuel beneath the deck. Fires grew higher, and then the 11th and 12th drones strategically detonated barrier charges along the approach lanes to block tugboats. Relay drones kept transmitting telemetry and recording the damage. Systems failed sequentially: power loss, pump failure, uncontrolled flooding, and structural fatigue. The ship was mortally wounded by 10:50, and by 14:32, satellite images showed the Port Olia 4 submerged in the Caspian. Smoke still visible above the wreck. Russia first described the incident as minor, but the wreck's pictures were circulating on social media. Open-source analysts matched coastal landmarks, cranes, and light poles to geolocate the images. Satellite imagery then confirmed a plume of smoke visible from 10 kilometers away. On August 14th, Ukraine's general staff said the Port Olia 4 had been carrying Iranian UAV components and ammunition. Follow-up images on August 19th showed Russian salvage attempts. The loss was huge. The cargo equaled thousands of drone parts and more than 12,000 kilograms of explosives. Russia could not assemble Shahed drones at scale without avionics, navigation units, and power systems. The strike removed both material and momentum from planned attacks. Markets and maritime operators reacted immediately. War risk premiums rose. AIS blackouts increased. Some ships began sailing under false call signs, and convoy methods slowed port turnover. Transshipment through more points drove costs up and left longer logistical trails. Caspian coastal states convened emergency meetings about maritime safety. The sea that had felt like a rear area was now a contested space. From Kiev's point of view, the operation extended the war beyond the Black Sea and disrupted Russia's drone campaign. For Moscow, the strike exposed fragile supply chains and reduced nightly barge attacks on Ukrainian cities. That strike rewrote how militaries and merchants think about risk. What surprised you most? The drones range, the satellite work, or the fallout for shipping? Drop your view in the comments. If this helped, like the video and subscribe Stay tuned.